Okay, so let me introduce the screenwriter Tony Award and Obie Award, David Henry HWANG. I think we don't need much introduction. Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Carolyn, who is the conductor, a very talented Asian female conductor. It's welcome. And Chen, the director of this opera. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, really appreciate it. I know that An American Soldier, it's not the first time, to put on, to have opera, to premiere in the United States. It's 2014 and 2018. Now it's the third time. So why do it again?
I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of this piece.
Yes.
And the story on which it's based, which I think has some bearing on the question. Okay. Private Danny Chen was an American kid born in Lower Manhattan, grew up in New York, Chinatown, and he volunteered after 9/11 to join the US Army. And he ended up being sent to a region of Afghanistan called Kandahar, and fell into a situation where he had a particularly racist sergeant and nobody else to act as a check or balance. And so he was essentially racially hazed to death. And died in Afghanistan. And around 2012, 2013, a woman named Liz Ouyang, who some of you may know, who is a advocate and civil rights attorney, Liz approached me and asked if I wanted to write a play about Private Danny Chen. And I actually didn't, because just where I am artistically in terms of the playwriting I did, I was and continue to be sort of more interested in comedy, irony, meta narratives, things like that. However, the composer Huang Ro had a commission from Washington National Opera in DC to write a 1-hour opera. And we were talking about collaborating on it. And we both thought that the story of Private Danny Chen was actually really suited to opera, because it's not a story that, in my view, has a lot of moral nuance. It's pretty clear what the issues are, who the protagonist is, and the forces that are arrayed against him. And opera's good with kind of big emotions and love and death. And so we initially did it in this 1-hour version in 2014, very soon after Danny's death. And at that point, because it was an hour, we essentially created what we called a docu-opera, where we were drawing from the text, from a lot of the transcripts of the subsequent court-martial trial of the superiors who hazed him, and newspaper accounts. And
David, is all the stuff in the 2014 version in this version, or some of the things are no longer in the series?
Push the button to turn it on. Oh, turn green.
Oh, it needs to
Turn
turn
green.
green.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
That makes a big difference. Okay. Yeah. So I think generally everything that's in the 2014 version is in this full-length 2018 version. But we were able, in the Opera Theater of St. Louis gave us the opportunity to do a full-length version. And because we had more time with it, we were able to then sort of deepen the characters, and we sort of created a proto-love interest. So for instance, the scene on the fire escape was initially, in the 2014 version, was Danny and a buddy, and they're kind of, you know, arguing about whether he's going to enlist. And in this 2018 version, he's arguing with a fellow female student that, you know, there's sort of sparks that are flying between them. So, so we did this 2018 version, and the family of Private Chen has been an incredibly important part of this collaboration, because it's not the kind of story we wanted to tell without the approval and cooperation of the family. So very early on, Huang Ro had a conversation with Danny's mother, Shuzhen Chen, and she basically said she just didn't want people to forget her son. And I think as a result of that, and also because at the time of writing the original, Huang Ro had just become a father for the first time, and so kind of the emotional spine of the opera, even in 2014, was the mother-son story, and what it means to be a mother who is both grieving her fallen son and also trying to fight for justice. And in 2008, and so the family was always with us. They came to the Washington production, and also came in larger numbers to the 2018 production. And at that point, Huang Ro and I sort of made the commitment to the Chen family that we would bring the show to New York, which is where Danny was from, where the people who know him live, and the privilege of doing it right now at PAC NYC, which is at the World Trade Center, and the events of 9/11 helped motivate Danny to enlist in the first place. So we feel that with this production, we're finally able to fulfill our commitment to the Chen family to bring Danny home.
There's literally a line in the opera, you know, he's singing about, you know, sort of after 9/11 and people were, so it's very much connected to the World Trade Center. And I also want to add that actually in the world of opera, it's actually very special to have an opera have the kind of journey that this opera has had. Usually, you know, there's a new opera that's done and then that's it. You never hear from it again. And it's really special to have an opera, have the interest to have another company not only pick it up but say, you know, can you please extend it? And then to have another chance to put it together. So in the world of opera, I'm just super excited for Huang Ro and for this opera that this is getting heard by different audience and having a live, and hopefully having a much longer live in the future as well.
Yeah, it's because it's related with people's feeling, emotion. You know, David, you just mentioned this. Actually, this story tragedy is very fit for opera. You know, it has very intense emotion about death, about hazing. So, Carolyn, you are the conductor of this opera. How the music, you know, enhance this kind of feeling, you know, when you do the conducting?
You know, there's something that music can do that sort of, you know, it touches your heart in a way. Words always, I mean, actually, I will say I was reading through the libretto and then just, you know, and I was incredibly moved. It's like David has this incredible ability to sort of take these events, put it in the words that the words itself are just incredibly moving. And of course, I've worked with Huang Ro since 2014. I've known his music really well. And he has a way to kind of just touch on your heart with his music. And you can't help it, like, to feel even more emotionally engaged. And, you know, that's one of the many of these things I love about Huang Ro's music and opera. And when you combine the music with the words, there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah. So, Chay, you know, you are the director of the third word of this opera. Did you feel pressure?
Not really. I think I was tasked in a wonderful way by both Huang Ro and David to find a new way in. So the wonderful thing is then how do you get away from the other two productions? I didn't see the first one, but the second one I had the opportunity to see it on YouTube, a YouTube link. And it was wonderful to see someone do something first. Usually I do a lot of your work, but it's wonderful to say, now how do I respond to this? And actually find another different way in. And then because I think the second production was more realistic and was set the way that it was written, the idea was to go against it and maybe find more of the interior lives of the characters through a bare space. And also, in a wonderful way, this bare space is about distance between people. And the idea that you can also evoke any moment that the opera suggests. And the opera is so beautifully written, and there's so many ways that the past collides with a memory, collides with the present tense story of being in a courtroom. So the way that it accumulates emotionally is where I find the most excitement. And to what Carolyn said too, I think as much as Huang Ro's music is so beautifully written, it's also very dramatic. There are moments where David's dramatic intent, is actually honored in notes and rests particularly. And also David's libretto I found really, I don't think I've ever said this, but even reading it and being Chinese, I tend to put a wall on what I feel, and that's the way I am. But to actually experience the story and it coming to life, it was pretty impactful for a lot of us Asian American artists in the room, because it brought up unresolved feelings about, generational gap relationships between parent and child, immigrant and an American child, the notions of wanting the American dream, and yet how does the expectations of immigrant Asian parents hold and want for the children, and the unspoken emotions and feelings that one has for a parent, vice versa, are sometimes very difficult to articulate. And I feel David's libretto captured it so beautifully, as well as the way the music simmers in your soul. Which is very interesting, because in this day and age, because the opera deals with a lot of very complicated issues, particularly bullying. There's a moment of violence and also sexual violence. And when I would ask the entire company about these moments, how to approach them, are you all right? They basically said, I'm okay with that, but it's when I had to sing about my feelings to my mother or my girlfriend, that's when they get emotional. So I think, like you say, there's some things that we as human beings function very differently on a human day-to-day basis. What art and sometimes opera and music does is to bring what you feel and what you hold inside sung to the rest of the world.
And especially music as a way of stopping time, actually. So, right, you have thinking about, I love you. You can talk, I don't know, you guys know much more about play. In a play, you say, I love you. How many times can you say it in a play? Many different times, but in the opera, it can go on. Literally, there are some opera, they I hate you can last an hour. I'm thinking about Wagner opera, but those of you, literally one emotion, I love you, can last, 30, 45 minutes. So music has this way of just stopping time and for us to get into these either difficult feelings or really moving feeling and let us kind of just sit there. And there's something, and Huang Ro does it extremely well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you mentioned I love you. I think that any kind of art, type, like, when you read novel, when you actually human being, relation, it's kind of same, because I love you. It's like one person to another person feeling. This exact same feeling can be interpreted by so many variety of ways. What is a great masterpiece is that you find a great way to express the I love you, right? I think this opera really found, very excellent way. The music, the script, the director really put it the I love you, this kind of feeling, it's really interpreted in a very beautiful way. Yeah.
In terms of libretto writing, I also just want to say that libretti need to be very concise, because once you said I love you, it makes me think of this example, because if you say I love you, it takes however many seconds. But if you sing I love you,
Yeah.
it takes so much longer. So one of the techniques of libretto writing is, you know, all scripts need to be concise, but I think libretto writing that much more so.
Yeah, it's great. Actually, you know, I'm so glad that we can talk about this story. You know, it's like Danny Chen is basically was hastened to death, but it's not rare, you know, for an American soldier, you know, in the U.S. Army, Asian American, especially because the low enrollment or whatever reason, racial reason, you know, Danny Chen is not the first Asian American was abused in the army. It's kind of it's a regular, you know, it's not rare, I would say that. Do you think after this, an American soldier was put, you know, it's this opera, you know, it's now it's the third time to do this opera. Do you think this opera, you know, can help in some way to reduce this situation in the army?
So this goes to this whole question of to what extent does art actually affect in a substantive manner either kind of policy or change people's minds or, you know, affect a political movement. And I don't know that any work of art literally has the power to change people's minds or to create a movement or to cause a law to be passed. And an opera, just by the nature of the form, you know, we're doing like a week of performances, and that's pretty good for an opera, but you don't do that many performances. However, I think what you can do with art, and opera being an example of that, is kind of be a vanguard that causes a ripple effect, and that it goes into the culture and it begins to make people ask questions, and it highlights an issue and something that people may not have been aware of. So even a gathering like this, even the reviews in the papers, whether people like it or not, it brings up a subject that a lot of readers may not have been aware of. And I was really proud that when we did the opera in DC and also in St. Louis, but there was quite a bit of our audience that were military. And whether they were veterans or they were active duty service people, and that they were attracted to this subject because it seemed to have something to do with their work. And then I think the response we got was very positive from them. You know, you might be afraid, or one might be afraid that, oh, well, it's critical of the military, so are they going to like it? Are they going to be offended? But the servicemen that at least go to see opera are very clear that, you know, this is not something that should happen in the military, and it's bad for cohesion, and it's bad for the ability to work as a unit, and therefore we need to do more things to prevent this type of incident from happening.
Carolyn, when you do the conductor of this opera, are you aware of this? How did you feel this cultural identity of Asian American in this opera?
Actually, I want to go back to your previous thing that David was talking about. You know, this actually, I feel very strongly, you know, it reminds me of one of those stories I grew up listening, hearing, you know, the story of the one chopstick. You know, one chopstick, you can break it. When you have a bundle of chopsticks, you can't break it. It's much harder. And that's actually how I feel about what we do with arts and about stories like this, is that, you know, can we change the world with one opera? Maybe not, but we might be able to change the world with Pvt opera, plus all the art, plus all the conversation we're having, it is, in my mind, you know, as an artist, it's very important to go out and do the things that we believe in. I mean, I think, you know, we live in a very challenging world that, you know, are the Chinese, are the Asians struggling? Yes, but so are a lot of other minority, and I think all the minority stories are powerful, are important to be heard. And so that's actually kind of how I look at it, but even more than that, I think there's an element that people don't realize is that part of what Huang Ruo and David has done is create a space for Asian artists. So literally, in order to put on this opera, you have to have an Asian lead singer. And if you look at opera out there, how often do you see an Asian lead tenor or Asian lead soprano? Hardly ever. And so essentially, and this is what one of many other reasons I love about Huang Ruo is that he is, in one of the previous opera I've done together with him, the M Butterfly, not only he's asked for a lead Asian singer, he's asked for a lead Asian countertenor. Now, good luck finding one. But because he's written it, it has forced arts organization, for its arts leader, that they can't just do the easy thing. You know, well, we know this you know, countertenor that everybody knows. Let's just hire that person. They literally have to go out and find a Asian countertenor. And have they found one? Absolutely. If people put in the effort, there are fantastic Asian artists out there, and it's because of people like Huang Ruo and David that they are giving us the opportunity, literally artists to be seen by people. And that's part of, I think, the ripple effect David is talking about, and part of the many chopsticks that I'm thinking about.
By the way, for those of you who are not familiar with opera, a countertenor is male singer who sings in a female range.
Kind of like the traditional, like,
Picking
opera,
right?
right, yeah, but you
Yeah.
know, in Western music.
Jay, what's your thought on this? Both on the, you know, on the
Your question was,
Yes.
you know.
yeah, on my question and Carolyn's question.
I think, am I on?
Yeah.
It's true that we have to have more narratives. I mean, I was just at this conversation, I think within 12 hours, there was a time when one theater in New York did only one Asian play. And we used to call it affectionately with a name for that slot. But that was only one Asian American play in the entire city. And now, there are more. So as our country grows, hopefully more pluralistic, these stories need to be told. You cannot be an American today and not understand the histories and the narratives of everyone else in this room. You are part of that legacy and it's part of your citizenship. And when schools fail, the arts might need to take the slack. So how do we tell these stories so that we can see someone across the subway and say, that's a human being, he's an American, and what is that story? It's so easy to not say anything. And it's so easy to not produce these stories or present these stories to you, because that is a response. And that response is silence. And when there's silence, it's also an approval and a response in and of itself. And that means at some point, someone else is going to tell your story the way that they want. And God forbid the consequences show up at the election booth. So this is one of the few countries, it is very complicated. It is still in chaos and sometimes in a way of growing, but we have the First Amendment. So we need to embrace all stories. And to what David and what Carolyn has said, the more the merrier and the better. So we, and us, telling our great-grandchildren, this is your legacy, and hopefully someone not in our community can also say, this is also part of our history and our legacy and our history. And I'll just say, it's so easy to say all these things, but I think I wouldn't be sitting here also without David Henry HWANG, because when I was younger, before I became a writer and into the theater, David spoke to me, whether he remembered or not. He was actually at Brandeis. And that made me consider writing. And again, when I reach out to David again, our community opens those doors and David uplifts. And that baton is passed to me and to a generation of others. So I think as a community, we need to make sure that our stories are told.
Exactly.
We must tell them.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Thank you, Chay.
Yeah, thank you. You guys really did a fantastic job because, I remember, I saw a story from Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal owner, Murdoch, he once said, who controls the narrative? Who controls the history? Yeah. So narrative story, our narrative is very, very important to shaping the public view of Asian American. I think you guys really did a very, very historical job, in putting this story to an opera. But, Danny Chen's story, in some way, somehow, does it reflect the Asian man's status in the United States? Yeah, you are Asian man.
To what extent does it illuminate or reflect sort of a narrative about Asian American masculinity? I think that one of the slurs that Danny's tormentor, the sergeant who is his superior in Afghanistan, uses against him, which is taken from the record. The name of the superior's changed, is Dragon Lady. And I think it's an interesting use of that term because it's certainly it's meant to be demeaning, but it's also meant to sort of dehumanize and emasculate Danny. And this sergeant, who we call Markham, Markham also has sort of an aria, a Billy Budd-like aria about, Asians are good with books, but they're weak, and I have to make them tougher, and...
Danny himself said he's the weakest in the army.
Well, Danny said that he was weakest when he started and went into basic training, but he also felt very proud of the fact that he made it through basic training where other people had dropped out. So he had this sort of, he grew, his muscles probably physically grew, but he also had the kind of stick-to-itiveness and the dedication to complete basic training successfully when many other people had dropped out. And in that respect, he was really proud of himself by the time he was sent to Afghanistan. But it is part of this general narrative of the emasculation of Asian men, and therefore the assumption that they're not going to be good in the military, which sort of doesn't make sense if you consider kind of the history of lots of wars in Asia. So clearly there is nothing genetically inherent about being of the Asian descent and being male in terms of your ability to fight. And it's really kind of a Western stereotype that is imposed upon Danny and other Asian American soldiers.
It's not only in the army, it's everywhere. Currently, you are a female conductor. I think you will have much better opportunity than your Asian man, the artist. It's same with our children. When they go to college, Asian girl always have a better chance to be admitted to the Ivy League than Asian boy. So how did you feel that?
I don't know, it's not something I think about very often, honestly. I mean, the fact that you are, just by the fact that, we almost can't, in the sense that we are who we are, right? So, starting out, people always like to ask the conductor, what it's like being a female conductor, what it's like being an Asian conductor, and I always tell people this story, which is, when I was in school, learning to conduct, I had a wonderful professor who's actually very caring, and he pulled me aside one day and said, Carolyn, you're really good at what you do, but you have 3 big strikes against you. You're young, you're female, and you're Asian. And I remember looking at him and said, well, hey, at least one of those things would change. right? I'm not always going to be young, and somehow overnight I've gotten from too young to too old as a conductor. That's a whole other story. But so in that sense, I don't know, maybe because I have to, so it's not something I think about. Because if you start thinking about if I'm not getting opportunity because I'm young, Asian, or female, then there's no end to it. So I can't actually answer that question. I will, however, say about the fascinating thing that's happened to me this last week. Doing this opera, one of the line, I don't know, yes, one of the line, and in fact, that Danny actually talked about wanting to be a police officer after he comes back from his training. And I've been walking down 7th Avenue all week. And so Times Square, there's always a lot of police. And for, I want to say a whole week, I have not seen a single Asian police officer. And, but I want to say 3 days ago, I think our President Biden was in town and there were more police. And there was one Asian officer in the middle of the road helping people. And for some reason, I was incredibly moved just seeing him. I don't know if it's because I'm working on this opera and knowing that Danny Chen died trying to be a police officer and seeing this Asian police officer, like haven't seen one at all. I went up to him and I said, I just want to let you know that how amazing it is to see an Asian police officer. Thank you for doing what you do. And it's a moment I think I won't forget in a long time, just his reaction and just how he made me feel. And I wish that's kind of a feeling that can be shared with a lot of people. Somehow just seeing him made a difference somehow in my life, in that moment and probably many moments to come.
That's so cool.
I also just want to add, I know that Carolyn doesn't want to talk about what she has had to deal with as a female conductor, but I do think it's rarer to have an Asian female conductor than, because we can think of male Asian conductors. We can think of Seiji Ozawa, we can think of Zubineta, and this is, I feel very privileged and thrilled that we are conducted here, and also Carolyn conducted the M Butterfly in Santa Fe by Carolyn specifically, but an Asian female conductor.
That's so cool. Yes, so Chay, what's your view? You're thinking that, when we're talking about, sometimes people are joking that in the United States, like the social status, it's like Asian man is the lowest on the rank. So what's your thought on that? That's true, right?
I'll just say that if I thought it, I wouldn't be sitting up here.
Hello.
I think it's not unusual, and I think it's always a surprise to most of my white colleagues and friends when I say, if I go up for something, I have to be 5 times better than you.
Yeah.
And my thinking is, then I have to be 5 times better. I just have to be 5 times better than you are, and try to do all the things that we need to do until that we get to the place. And I think we're getting to a wonderful place where most of our communities are now in places where we can become the people to open those doors instead of those who shut them. And I think once you get into the room, your job is to open those doors. As, like I said, David with me, and the baton is now at my feet. So what do we do? So we need to raise our community and other communities of color to join the table. The proverbial table is actually mythological because you think they're like 5 seats. They're not. Just make room. And when you're there, make room for other people. And also uplift the next generation of leaders and artists, because they're the ones who are going to pick up the baton at some point. So even though, this is what I think, and I can't speak for a lot of people, they may look at you in a place where you don't belong, act like you belong, and take the room. If they say no, fine. Doesn't mean that you are defined by what they say. It means you should do more, and you'll find it. And I believe in it because I don't think we're all seated here if we gave up and just said we're willing to do that one thing, to be in the shadows or be lowerly ranked. But because we're up here now, how can we raise and uplift everyone else?
That's so cool. When I prepared this event, when I checked all the articles about Danny Chen, it reminds me that I know throughout U.S. history, it's a history of against discrimination, against against all kind of discrimination. But Danny Chen reminds me of in the past, recently, the famous incident, against Asian. Like in 2017, Jimmy Kimmel Live showed that, he has showed that, there is a bunch of kids talking about, China right now, United States own China's debt. And then the kids say, why not kill them all? And ABC really put this on the national TV. It's really very, very unacceptable. So I went to Times Square to protest for this. Because you cannot imagine this program say the same thing to Jews, to Palestinians, to black people. Not any other ethnicity is not okay. But to kill them all, to kill Chinese all, even from a 5-year or 6-year-old kid saying that, but this network, broadcasted the pure fact that it's showed that, Asian American, Chinese American is really, facing a lot of challenge, to stay in this country. And also you mentioned the Chinese officer, right? The police officer. Yeah, but do you still remember Peter Liang? Peter Liang, the Chinese American officer who accidentally, deadly shot a black man when he was on duty. Just previous, there are 2 white officers did exactly same thing, or even more serious thing, but they all were dismissed. But Peter Liang was put on trial, was charged. So if without all the Chinese Americans help protest, I guarantee you Peter Liang will be put in the prison. But he did not, because all of the community, I belong, we organized so many people to go to went to New York City to protest it, to donate money, to write to the judge. But then, in the end, he was not put in jail. He was kind of just staying home, like, for a few months or something, but it's not that serious. But it all reminds me, Chinese American, Asian American are still facing tremendous challenge in this country. So my question is that, in this environment, Sino-US relation is getting deteriorating. And with this pandemic, we have this Asian hate. So do you expect Asian American, especially Chinese American, our situation will get worse in this country?
Who wants to start?
Okay.
I usually go first.
I mean, the short answer is I don't know. The logical answer is probably. I mean, it's not my area of expertise, but it certainly feels like, and when we talk about discrimination, my odd observation is that discrimination seems to happen on both ends.
Yeah.
In the sense that, there's the discrimination because you're not good enough, and there's the discrimination because you're too good.
Yes.
And that is a very unique challenge that Asians seem to have, right? Exactly. It's like, on the other hand, you're not good enough to be, in a lot of situations, to be considered into the executive situation, whatever. But then on other situation is, no, we don't want more Asian being in this position because too many of you are already in these wonderful positions. Or what? So, and with the challenge of what's happening in China, again, not my area of expertise, but history says that if one day United States does end up in conflict with China, the people, the Chinese American, the Asians, well, especially Chinese American, or just Chinese in general in this country, will be targeted. again, not my area expertise, but it certainly seems, it's a worry for myself. I can only speak for myself. And the other observation that I see is as Chinese, and Asian possibly, and probably part of our culture, I certainly grow up being told that, you know, if it's not your problem, you know, close your door or something. Like, isn't there a phrase, you know, like only get rid of the dust in front of your house?
Yeah. 至少门前雪.
至少能谦虚, exactly, right? So, but we live in a time that we cannot do that, exactly like you say. You know,
Yeah.
we really have to support each other and go out of our way, and almost feels like we need to go out and claim our space
Yes.
and be there for each other and actually not 至少能谦虚. So don't only clear the snow in front of your house is the thing. So how do we get into that kind of mentality? And I will say, I think, you know, for those of us that has the privilege to be in public in artistic roles and others, we create a situation where people actually listen to some of us sometimes. How do those of us that have that kind of reach, and it's not just, you know, some of us are very fortunate to have reach beyond the Asian, you know, certainly as a music director at Hartford Symphony, I have a greater reach certainly in Hartford with a lot of different people. How do I use that to help them understand the importance of what's happening, that we live in a time that if we don't go out and try to say the right thing, try to speak for integrity, try to speak for doing the right thing, that things will get worse. And this is the time to go out and use our voice and use our influence.
Yeah, I think historically, the way that Asian Americans are regarded and treated in this country has always been a function of America's relationship to a root culture Asian country. Because since our Americanness is somewhat provisional and we are perpetual foreigners, which is one of the things that this opera explores, therefore, conflicts with Asian nations tend to redound on us, and you see that in Japanese American internment, you see that in the murder of Vincent Chen in the 90s, and we see it in the pandemic. We saw it in 2020. And what that says to me is that the part of the lesson I take from that is that this sort of model minorityism and accommodating racism against any group doesn't help us. Like, we think it makes us safe until it doesn't. And what has actually made us safer have been laws that have been passed in order to explicitly fight racism, whether it's the Civil Rights Act or the Fair Housing Act. When my parents were, before I was born, my parents tried to buy a house in Monterey Park in Southern California and were turned down because they were Chinese, which now any of you who know Southern California knows that's kind of outrageous because Monterey Park is now suburban Chinatown. But it's the passage of fair housing laws. I'm a big advocate of affirmative action. I feel like I got to my first theater because of affirmative action. I know people I have a friend who was hired on to the TV show Succession as the diversity hire. And she ended up writing for all 4 seasons, and now she has 2 Emmys. So these are sorts of programs and laws that I believe have helped us, and we should be in solidarity with other people of color, other marginalized communities, to actually make institutional change that's going to protect us, as opposed to feeling that our white adjacentness will protect us.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I totally agree. I think, you know, as Asian, as model minority, we have kind of double-sided victim, you know. Just now you said, you know, on the one hand, you know, we're not good enough. On the other hand, you know, we are too good. I'm feeling that, you know, racial problem in the United States is so complicated. Like in 2008, and 2016, President Obama was elected twice. It showed that mainstream American is able to, forget people's color, to see if this person is capable of being the president of the United States. To a certain degree, by that time, I remember clearly on the night President Obama was elected, I'm so thrilled. I'm so proud of this country. I really think my son and my daughter in the future, they really have a shot. But, things happens after 2016, after these things, it's now, when I read the incidents, events, I said it's all after 2008, it's like still all these discriminations against us. And on the other hand, the identity politics, they hurt us too. Just now you mentioned affirmative action, you really, I believe a lot of minorities are benefited from this affirmative action. But on the other hand, I will say a lot of young Asian students right now really got hurt by affirmative action because every league saw you too much Asian, too much Chinese, it's like we cannot have you all. We need to have diversity. You just compete among yourself. You can only have around 20% or something like that. I just feel, it's so complicated. It's how to evaluate ourselves, how to navigate ourselves in this very difficult time in America.
I mean, personally, I would love to see more representation
Yeah.
in Congress and Senate or local government. I think I would love to see more of that. But interesting one thing you mentioned, and I don't know how many of you actually experience things like that. If you're in an organization that are constantly talking about diversity, DEI or IDEA, they're different names, and it's fascinating. And maybe just in the arts industry, we are always talking about DEI now, but I can't tell you how many DEI meeting I go to, and we start talking about diversity, and we talk about, we need more African American artists, we need more Latino artists, but Asians don't count. We're not. But wait a minute, Asians are part of the BIPOC technically, but no, we don't actually. Like we mean
DEI without Asians.
DEI actually is almost feel like we don't exist actually.
Yeah.
Sometimes. So again, it's again observation. And how do we combat it? I have no idea. I mean, if I have one answer, it would be those of people that are in a position of power, leadership position, to actually say, no, they should be included. If DEI is important, Asians are part of BIPOC.
Chen, you just mentioned that you need to be 5 times better, but it's unfair. It's very difficult to be even 1 time or 1.5 times better.
No, I'll say that's probably generational too, because I think the things that we have done, and I think
Are you saying we're all too old? Just
I
kidding.
think a lot of generations
I've been making fun of
from the
Shay
80s and the 90s, from the baby boomers or the Gen X, we all have different philosophies. And I think the last 2 generations, the millennials and the Gen Zs, the Gen Zs are wonderful because I love the way they think. And I think because of knowledge that they have accumulated so easily that we do not have access to, but the sheer fact of there is the internet, I'm looking towards them to make significant change. So all the other generations have to figure out what a brain trust looks like to help support the next generation to make the changes that we tried to do, and yet, even though we may make incremental changes, the next few generations will have to pick up the slack. That said, I do feel I'm not saying there's not work to be done. I don't think most people need to work 5 times as hard, but I always say that's what I say to myself, because sometimes you're the first at the door, and David knows this. And my big thing is, I can't fail. If I fail, they will say, see, we gave that job to that person, and they do it. So we should go back to what we know best. And that includes women. Ladies, you know what I'm talking about. So do we have to work harder? Yeah, sometimes we have to do that. I think the eye on the prize is a future generation that does not have to do that. And we cannot eradicate racism like that because we want it, because I'm sorry, we're not in an episode of I Dream of Jeannie. I would love to eradicate racism too, but every step that we take, sometimes it's 3 steps back, but we still make it to the next few steps so that the next generation do not have to sit at the back of the bus and people can enter a place without being told to leave. It's an incremental change. We're at the place where we can get anything that we want by getting on an app and it comes the next day. But some of these things don't happen that way. And I think, and I'm very hopeful, there are more, the fact that Carolyn's sitting next to us, I think there are a lot more Carolyns running around and we see them in our family and on the streets. They're the future. They're not, and we have to say that some of the things that we have done and people before us have done have given that opportunity for the young people to do what they do. If we ever forget, just remember the lesson of abortion, because we didn't teach that enough, that some people forgot. Now we have to go back to reteach. So it's always going to be complicated, and I wish it was easier, but I do feel optimistic incrementally.
That's great. David, yourself.
I'm also optimistic just because those of us who are old enough remember a cultural landscape that was really quite different. I always like to say that when I was a kid, if I knew there was going to be a TV show or a movie with an Asian character, I would go out of my way not to watch it, because I had intuited that something terrible was going to happen. And they were going to be the villains, or they were going to, sort of be sexy women who seduce the white guy, or most likely they would be the butt of the joke. So you'd see an Asian guy, I'd see an Asian character as a kid, and it was always like, okay, when's the fried rice joke gonna hit? Or when's the laundry joke gonna hit? Or when's the, so I kind of feel like I was oppressed by American popular culture. And therefore, it's understandable that maybe that I spent my adult life now trying to sort of gain access to the levers of culture and shift the lens to my point of view. And a lot of things have changed. We're not in a utopian place by any means, but the landscape is certainly better than it was when I had my first play produced at the Public Theater in 1980. So it's incredibly gratifying to feel like we have been able to be part of making that shift happen in the culture, and then, if not young enough, at least still vital enough to be able to take advantage of some of the new opportunities that are available to us. And therefore, looking at that sort of longer stretch of cultural history and the progress that has been made leads me to want to continue to believe that progress can continue.
That's great. I really think, one day, it's kind of cliche, but I really think, Dr. Martin Luther King said, one day in this country, a person can really be judged by his or her character, not by his or her skin. We will see the real change. Thanks. Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. So now let's open the question, Q&A. Anyone has a question?
What I find particularly interesting about this entire discussion is the extent to which the themes that you're talking about and the themes that are illustrated in the opera are universal, right? Fear of the other, and there are lots of others who are victims of that, as well as the unique aspect of being an Asian American, or in particular, as we discussed, a Chinese American. So I think it'd be interesting to see how this opera is received in the community, and to what extent people will relate to the Chineseness or the Asianness or the otherness. But all these themes are spinning around this opera, and as they did this discussion, and I find it fascinating to see how it plays out.
Thank you. And I want to acknowledge Peter Darrow, who's the vice chair of the board of PAC NYC. Is that correct? And so thank you for giving us a home. And also, as long as we're acknowledging people, I mentioned Liz Ouyang earlier, and here she is, so. Thank you.
This lady first.
Hello, thank you so much. It was incredibly nice to hear all the story behind. My name is Bolor. I am from Mongolia, so I didn't grow up in this country, so I'm not really brainwashed by all this racial parts. So, as someone who grew up in a country where we don't talk about racial part, I don't even think myself as an Asian woman. I just think I'm a human being. And then I'm so proud of hearing Caroline that saying, yeah, I don't think about this. So I think it needs to start within. And then getting back to David's point, in fact, I'm from Mongolia. The second largest empire was Mongol army conquered half the world. So there is no point Asian man is demasculinity, whatever we call it, of Asian men. So no. Thank you.
I'm lucky to have a seat 2014 in Washington, D.C. So when the play come out, the mother cannot, I think she broke down. So this time, when you making this offer again, did you contact their family member?
Yes, actually, maybe I can turn that over to Liz, this question, and you can also ask whatever you want to ask. The question being about are we in touch with the family for this version?
Absolutely. Pat really reached out to us early, and we met with the family, and David and members of PAC and Huang Ro. As David said, the mother most cares about that no one forgets her son. And so, as painful as it is to revisit what happens to her son, she's doing it because foremost is we don't want to forget what happens to her son. And so, as a civil rights attorney and advocate, it would not be like me not to comment on some of the things that were raised on the panel, because from a civil rights perspective, we are grateful to Pac and David and Henry for putting his story in another medium. 30, maybe 40, maybe 50 people will come hear a lecture about what happened to Danny. But 500 people, 5 times, starting May 12th to the 19th, are coming out to see this opera. So their reach is important. The people that they reach to see this opera may be apolitical, or maybe not as knowledgeable about the issue of hazing. So it's planting seeds. And most importantly, the Army would like to see us go away and have Danny's story be buried under the rug. But the more we're like a little mosquito you can't swat in the room, we're coming out again and again and again to remind them of what's happened to Danny, because as Susan mentioned, it's happening as we speak. And American Soldier is most timely now because the U.S. Army is having a difficult time recruiting people to serve. And so, if they're going to attract Asian Americans to serve in the military, and this is happening to our children, our brothers and sisters, our nephews and nieces, our role as advocates is to educate and educate that this is happening. It is a most notable decision to serve your country, but they have to have an informed knowledge and if they're making these decisions. And our role is to make sure they have that information. Danny did not know what he was getting into. Had he known, he would have been able to make an informed decision. So we're not anti-military, we're not pro-military. What we are is making sure that people have an informed knowledge before they make a decision like this to serve our country. I just want to comment just one other thing is the notion of affirmative action. I teach at Columbia and NYU, and civil rights and discrimination is part of my expertise. And we can't have it one way and not have it another way. Many of us, like David, I'm a beneficiary of affirmative action in employment. You know, you can't have it one way then not have it another way. And so that's really important for us to understand. And the coalition building that Carolyn is talking about, when particularly 9/11 and Arab Muslims and South Asians were under attack, and COVID-19, when East Asians were under attack, African Americans would say to me, what's going on is wrong, Liz, but where were you when this incident of police brutality happened, this incident, this incident, this incident? And I would say to them, well, actually, I was there, but media chose not to portray it until George Floyd happened as a multicultural issue that we are all concerned about. I was there, crossing the bridge when Amadou Diallo was shot. I was there when Eric Gardner was choked to death in the marches and the protests. But people didn't pick that up, you know what I mean? And so this dialogue is so critical when we talk about we cannot afford to be silent, especially as our country is moving to a majority-minority country. And so what's happening, the challenges, the backlash, is not coincidental. It is very much intentional. And so Asian Americans cannot afford to be quiet and to be silent. And so what this production means to us in the community, one, that a Chinatown son, a Manhattan Chinatown son, life is important enough that an opera would be produced in the heart of the World Trade Center, just a hop, skip, and a jump from where Danny grew up. That sends volumes. And as we were the faces of Danny in the courtroom, we must be the faces of Danny in the theater. To let people know, like Pat, that these are stories that need to be told, and that if you tell them, Asian American community particularly will come out and support it, and support the arts. So thank you.
That's great. That's it. Yeah.
This is. Thank you, Tita. I would love to know how you are organizing affinity groups around the production, whether it's in communities or other events or interviews or what. Just strategically, how are you going to spread the word through other groups?
Penny, do you want to handle that one?
Sure. I will stick to Joanna as close as possible so I have a backup.
Yes, I'm here.
So hi, my name is Penny. I'm the Associate Director of Civic Alliances at the PAC. My job really is to make sure the PAC is a welcoming space for all at all times possible, but I also do show specific work like this one. So of course this event is one of the efforts that we're making to engage the Asian American community, especially the Chinese American community, but just listing my efforts here, Like I've been distributing community comms via community organizations that are focused on immigration and Asian American advocacy efforts. There will be a community-based panel May 18th post-show. There will also be, I also arranged a tech visit for a number of Asian American community members as well. Those are people with particular platforms, so I'm hoping they will spread the words as well. So in general, the work I'm doing is because we are, like the PAC is one organization, so what I'm trying to do is really connect with other organizations and make use of that platform to make sure that the word gets out.
Okay, let's give one speaker another round of applause. Yeah, for the gentlemen, you can ask, when we finish this event. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.